Welcome to
Welcome,
Half Brain.
Half Heart.
All right, greetings, Monica.
Hello, Dr. Adwoa. How are you?
I'm good. And you?
I am well, thank you.
All right.
I am I'm very excited about our conversation today and maybe I don't know, maybe excited is not the right word to use given the topic, but it is a topic that I am extremely passionate about because I think it's so prevalent in just the day-to-day life that women, specifically women of color, people of color, experience in the workplace and just in life in general. And so, really excited to talk about this and just kind of really like get to the meat of some of the points around this. So today we are talking about microaggressions and stereotypes, specifically in the workplace. But I am confident that this conversation is going to take us out of the workplace as well.
Me too. Me too. Me too. I
So
think we should start with defining. Like,
I was just about to say that. So how do you define it or and then maybe we go through the like formal definition as well as the kind of how we interpret it as individuals.
well,
What
I
do you
have
think?
not pulled up the formal definition. You have the formal definition off the
I have
top.
there's a few of them, but what I will share with you right now is and this is from Oxford Dictionary, and they say it's a statement, action, or incident regarded as an instance or of indirect, subtle, or unintentional discrimination against members of a marginalized community, marginalized group, such as a racial or ethnic minority. And it goes on to say it's indirect, subtle, and unintentional discrimination. It actually repeats the same thing. There's another definition that says it is a term used for commonplace verbal, behavioral, or environmental slights, whether intentional or unintentional, that communicate hostile, derogatory, or negative attitudes toward a stigmatized or culturally marginalized group. Now that second one feels a little bit more resonates a little bit more to me than the Oxford kind of maybe the little stuffy version of that definition. What do you think?
I agree with you totally that the second one definitely resonated more with me. There were a couple of words in the Oxford one. I was like, yeah, yeah, yeah. But when you read the second one, I was like, yeah, that captures it more. That,
I'm going to read that again just so it's really
yeah,
clear. So it says microaggressions is a term used for commonplace verbal, behavioral, or environmental slights. And I think slights is what also like spoke to me,
yeah,
whether intentional or unintentional, that communicate hostile, derogatory, or negative attitudes towards stigmatized or culturally marginalized groups.
yeah. I also like the fact that they included intentional or unintentional, right? That
Yes.
when I heard you say that the first time, I was thinking, do we even need that? And I was like, no, because sometimes people get a pass when it may not be intentional, right? But that doesn't give it a pass just because you didn't intend to insult me, to belittle who I am. It doesn't give it a pass. So I
It
like
doesn't
the fact
change
that
the
they
impact.
included both intentional and unintentional because I think that a lot of the times it's not intentional, but that doesn't mean it's not impactful.
Mhm. Mhm. I think the outcome or the impact is not intentional, but I think the cause of it,
Hmm.
it's maybe not intentional, but it is representative of a belief
Yeah,
that one may whether they recognize it, whether it's something that they're, on that whether it's surface level or not, it is a belief or feeling that they might have about
yeah,
this stigmatized or marginalized group.
totally agree with you. I don't know if
So
I
if
can.
you were to give your definition, what
Yeah, I
would it?
was just thinking
Yeah.
that. Can I come up with a definition that's I don't think I can come up with a definition that's better than that second one. But when I talk about microaggressions with people, and it comes up a lot with my individual clients, uh, when I talk about microaggressions, I compare it to like Jim Crow. During Jim Crow times, and I always say, not that I think we should go back to that, but things were very clear that things were almost, for lack of a better way to say it, black and white, like very clear that people did not like you because of something that was beyond your control, because of the color of your skin, because um, maybe even because you're female. But the thing about microaggressions that's so difficult is that they are subtle, and that the subtle nature of a microaggression makes it so that the person on the receiving end ends up questioning, was it me or was it this situation? And so many of them, not all, but overall, that's what tends to happen. So I think there is a way that microaggressions erode self-confidence, because people start to really question whether it's something about them and not just based on something that is beyond their control, like skin color. And I think that's the major difference for me between microaggressions and racism and institutional racism, is that this really starts to get into who are you, like, in how do you show up as a person, not just as a person that's a member of a marginalized community.
I would have to second that. When you, as you were kind of sharing your thoughts around that, two things came up for me. One is it death by a thousand cuts.
Yes.
That's what microaggressions feels like. Whereas, you cut me once and you walk away, or you harm me, significantly. Yes, it's going to hurt. Maybe the damage is more in the outset, but then it's done. Microaggressions it's a repeated kind of offense, abuse, that's very hard to heal, because when you start to get to that healing point, or when you start to recognize it's not me, it's the scenario, it's the environment, or maybe it's the other person, you get hit again. And so you're like knocked down again, or you're cut again, and so whatever was healing is now reopened.
Hmm.
Um, and because of that, to me, it feels a little bit more insidious.
Yes, definitely more insidious.
It's more, psychological.
And it's
It,
harder to defend
again,
against.
it's, you hurt my body, it will heal, but you hurt my mind, or my emotions, or, all of these things. It's a tougher, it's tougher to fight something that you don't see.
Yes.
And it goes back to what you were saying about it being so subtle.
Yes. So as you were saying all that, I was thinking, yes, that it makes it harder to defend against. Right? When racism is really clear, then it's always been easier for us to defend against it, right? When you can't shop at our stores, we'll open up our own stores, right? We've had opportunities to do that we can point to across history, because when it's really clear, then you can figure out how to counterbalance it, how to deal with it. It's when it's so subtle that it's so much harder. You spend so much energy just trying to figure out, well, what's going on. I know that something somebody just said to me or something somebody did feels wrong, it feels hurtful, but I can't even quite figure out why. They were smiling, um I know Susan's a good person, right? So, but then why does this feel and so much of it is so like there's some things that are microaggressions that we all know, like you're so articulate, right? That's kind of a common one that.
Let's wait. I'm going to challenge you on that, because
Okay.
I definitely believe that to be a microaggression. And I
Yes.
have stories that I can tell you about hearing that in all walks of life for me and other people. But I recently, and I don't remember where it was, but somebody was like, why, I'm complimenting, and they had a different response to it. So one, I want to hear more about why do you, and I think I aligned with you on that, feel like that's a microaggression. But I think this highlights the point of, and why it's so insidious and why it's so hard to navigate, is because I, as the person who said it, may not have the intent, right? So we talked about that. You, as the person who is receiving it, might feel like it's, it was an aggression, and it was a slight against you. And then there's people around you, and there's this whole other, you know, some people are like, oh my gosh, yeah, I can't believe that they said that. The other part of it is, no, they were just complimenting you, and what's wrong with that, and all of these other things. And so again, it goes to that point of you're being forced to question and defend the something that you can't touch, and that nobody really seems to have seen it the same way, interpreted it the same way, and didn't have the same impact.
Exactly.
Which
Exactly.
I think, and we can talk about this later, makes it harder to address on both sides, as the person who's receiving it and as the person who is wielding the microaggressions against different people.
Exactly.
But going back to your example, so
Yeah.
talk to us about why
So
that's a
much.
micro.
I feel like we need to keep notes to try to keep all like all the directions we can go in straight. So I picked that one because the you're so articulate one, which I think you said you received also, is clearly it's a microaggression because when the people who say it, it's usually someone from uh, not a marginalized group, and saying it consciously or unconsciously with the tone of, well, I expected you not to be as articulate as you
That's
are.
the undertone.
It's
Hmm.
right, right. Like, why wouldn't you expect that?
Hmm.
I don't even understand why this needs to be a compliment because, especially at this point, I'm a doctor. So why would you not expect me to be articulate? Like that should just come, that should be your baseline expectation. And if anything, it should be the opposite. You're not as articulate as I thought you would be, right? Should be what you know, if that were the case. So, but that one is, I think, one that has happened enough and to enough people that we've talked about that microaggression, right? So it's still a microaggression, but it's clarity. Like we have clarity on what this means when somebody says it, and enough of us have experienced that. So when you talked about, the people around, like enough of us have experienced it so that we had conversations about it. So it's a common enough experience. So then that kind of moves it closer to other racism and further away from microaggression because there's enough people that we can say, oh yeah, somebody told that to you too, and you feel like, okay, then it's not just me. It's not, or I don't have to spend so much time figuring out, am I not articulate? Am I not pronouncing things? Like I don't have to spend as much mental energy around that because I've experienced it and I've talked to other people who've experienced it where so many microaggressions are just it's just you or we don't have as many of these conversations, so and it's we haven't heard about it, so they leave you really thinking what to do about it. And just to finish the how to defend against it, so if I know that this is a microaggression, I've heard it before, other people have talked about it, or I heard other people talking about it, so now maybe even this is the first time somebody said it to me, but I heard this podcast where people talked about it, so I understand exactly what's happening. If I understand exactly what's happening, it's so much easier. It's like having on armor, right? I'm, then it doesn't get in.
Hmm.
So it doesn't make me start to question, am I articulate or not? Am I not articulate? If you don't have the armor, then you start going to, well, what is it about me? Or like, why would they say that? It's just, it feels icky and you start questioning yourself. But when you're clear about it, then it might still be annoying. You still might not like it, but it doesn't get in as deep.
Yeah.
So that's
I'm gonna circle us back to just kind of like the final piece of defining it and giving some examples, and then I want to get back to the impact. I wrote down some notes. You saw me.
yes, I
And
know. I'm about to do the same. Go ahead.
um, because, and especially that example, because I feel like, and this is probably leads to other examples of microaggressions. Um, you talk about people who have experienced it, have witnessed it, have understand it, are basically the recipients of these microaggressions, and they typically, again, like the definitions have said, marginalized or stigmatized communities. And then there's the people who are wielding these microaggressions that do not seem to understand it because they, will sit in this place of, it wasn't my intent, and I gave you a compliment,
Yeah.
right? And I think part of the disconnect in these two camps is is a little bit of the history, right? And a little bit of the, why is it always a surprise that when certain people can articulate their thoughts or can write well?
Mm-hmm.
And why is it a surprise despite the fact of me holding the doctor title?
Mm-hmm.
Why is that a surprise when I, hold a C-level executive position and role within the organization? And then you start to think, how often is that compliment given to members that are not a part of this marginalized or not part of this stigmatized group?
Mm-hmm.
And when you start to kind of break it down like that, I don't know how much people are willing to really understand and kind of reflect on that. I think typically the response is always, at least that I've seen, has always been very defensive, has always been very, well, like, no, 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 you are taking this out of context. I didn't mean it like that, and still kind of putting that responsibility on you rather than reflecting on, you know what, how do I compliment other people? Because I think there's a very big difference, and again, sticking to this example, there's a difference of saying, wow, I really liked how you said this. That really spoke to me.
Mm-hmm.
That resonated with me, or I was just so moved, by how you wrote this. And it was so clear. It was so, that's saying, like, that's being specific and saying what I liked about what you delivered,
Mm-hmm.
how it impacted me, how it, helped people clarify, whatever the case is. But you saying, like, wow, that was so articulate, it has those undertones, right? These undertones. And I remember, someone had said this to me about someone else.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my gosh, the way that she wrote that, it was so articulate. I did not know that she could write like that. And I, getting into kind of how to respond, but, maybe not totally, but like how I responded in that moment was, why were you surprised? And they said, well, I just like I had never written, like read anything that this person had written. I said, but this person has multiple degrees, holds a C-level position. Why would you be surprised that they can string together a few sentences? Oh, I guess I hadn't thought about that. And I said, interesting. I said, I don't, I mean, I said, I would expect that of somebody of that stature. I'd be worried if they couldn't. That's more of the commentary, right? If they are at this level and have these degrees
And they can't.
and they can't perform or can't, communicate or can't articulate, like you said, that should be a given. And so it, I think it's a tough position to be in, and we'll talk a little bit about the impact, but I think when we talk about a lot of these microaggressions and we have conversations about them as if they are one-offs or as they happen sporadically. And I think what is really important for me to get across in this to everybody who's listening, and to validate, to your point, because as somebody who's receiving them, sometimes you're like, am I being too sensitive? Is it me? Is it, all of these different things? But I would say, as a Black woman, I would almost say on average, I probably experience a microaggression a day if I'm out in public. Right? If I'm interacting with people outside of my house, outside of my room, if I'm even interacting on, social channels or, phone call, whatever the case may be, when I am interacting with the world, it is a very regular thing, which I think also goes into the challenge of understanding it
Mm-hmm.
because it becomes normalized.
Yes.
And so if it's normalized, does it need a name? Does it have the same, you know what I mean? Like you start to kind of get into the space of, oh, it's just like waking up in the morning and brushing your teeth. You know, is that really something is it a chore? No, you just do it. It's just what, you know what I mean? And so it's like microaggressions is like, no, you just experience it.
Mm-hmm.
But it doesn't make it right.
And it doesn't mean that it doesn't have an impact, even if you start to normalize it. In fact, one of the problems is when we start to normalize it, then we stop paying attention to the impact,
Mhm.
but it doesn't mean that the impact goes away. It's still there. We just don't, we forget now where it's coming from. And it now, so now we don't realize that our lowered confidence in our abilities is not because we don't have confidence in our abilities. It's because so many people have told us, oh, you're so articulate, that it makes us start to wonder about, are we really able to speak? You know, it starts to get
Mhm.
in there in that way, which is insidious. So why don't we just, that's the definition of
That's
microaggressions.
the
The new definition is insidious.
insidious slights.
There you go.
Give me another example of microaggression.
Oh gosh, that articulate one is the one that comes to mind all the time. I don't know. You have one? I might have to think for a second.
And this goes back to it being so normalized that you often don't even you don't even think about it. I will have one. I will say one that actually kind of recently
Mm-hmm.
occurred in my world. Um, I'm a single woman. I, live in a beautiful house. Me and my dog. And I recently interacted with a neighbor of mine. And we just had like a really brief interaction on the street. I was taking out my trash. She was walking her dog. We just talked very briefly. And nice conversation. I find out a couple of days later that she um apparently like kind of sought out another neighbor, maybe not sought out, but made it a point to have this conversation about how can she afford to live in this neighborhood? How can she afford to live in this house?
Mm-hmm.
Um and again, I think that's one of those things where you're like, is it a microaggression? Is it just somebody being nosy? Is it all these things? But I think what makes it the microaggression is that you are looking at someone without having any understanding, without any kind of knowledge, and not seeking to understand who that person is.
Mm-hmm.
You will immediately kind of make a judgment based on what you do know, which is, what I look like, that I'm a Black woman. You are thinking, well, that's not what they usually do, or that's not what I think that they usually do.
Right.
And therefore, now I'm going to make these like kind of backhanded inquiries or slights, as the definition said, of what's going on there, right? And even in that question, it was a little bit of a, she can't be doing something legal for her to be in that space, right?
Wow.
It was a
Yeah.
little bit of like there's something there about that person, because what?
Yeah.
And so, I think that is a microaggression that I've experienced quite a bit throughout my life of how did you get into this space,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
It's how did you, oh, you went to this school? How did you get into, oh, how did that happen? Right? It's those little like, I'm surprised that you went to had this type of education. I'm surprised that you had this type of experience, right? Um, oh, when you talk about travel, oh, I didn't realize you traveled like that. Or I didn't, or how, well, why would you have realized? You've never asked me. But like if somebody else of a different group,
Right. It wouldn't be that
were
bluntly.
to say something, you would just accept that, you know? Oh, here's another one, and then I'll hand it over to you if you've thought of one. The Where are you really from? Where it's like, oh, I'm from, especially people who are, you know, maybe in environments that like there's not a lot of them, right? So it's like that question. And I feel like maybe not a lot of Black Americans get that, but I've heard it a lot from people from other, got different ancestries from other countries, right? And so it's a, wait, no, but like really where were you born? Right? If you were to
Can't
say
be
like,
African
oh, I'm,
American.
yes,
Mhm.
right? You can't possibly, but your hair is this way. Where are you really from? Or, where are you speak with this. Where are you really from? Right? When, I've heard it a lot sometimes with friends of mine that might be Asian, right? They're like, "Oh, I grew up here all my life." Or like, "Where are you from?" "Oh, I'm from California." But like, no, but like, where are you really from?
Mhm.
Right? It's this undertone of like, I think it also exhibits a little bit of entitlement and disbelief in what I'm telling you and what I've shared with you. It's this like one that can't be accurate because that doesn't fit into the narrative that I know about this
Mhm.
group.
Mhm.
And therefore there's got to be more, there's got to be an explanation.
Mhm.
And then it is this entitlement to, I have the right to my own thought, my own opinion around that, right? Or my own judgment around you. And I have the entitlement to dig a little bit more to make sure you're telling me the truth, what I think the truth is.
Mhm. Yeah, I haven't come up with, fortunately, yeah. COVID's helped that I don't go out into the real world as often as I used to. And I think I've kind of chosen for my own sanity to not, to really be focused on who I am and pay attention to getting information from people who I've already vetted as
Mm-hmm.
your opinion counts. And if
Mm-hmm.
you're not already vetted, then I don't even I have automatic armor up that I'm not even really listening to it,
Mm-hmm.
good or bad, right?
Yes.
But
Uh-huh.
if you're not already vetted, then because I don't even want to deal with that, which is one strategy. We haven't gotten to how to deal with it yet, but that's one strategy of to just kind of say, I'm going to vet the people whose information I'm going to take in. And if you're not one of these vetted people, then I'm not even really taking it in, good or bad. Whatever you say, like I'm hearing it, but I'm not letting it soak into who I am and have me start questioning who I am, or again, good or bad.
Good or bad.
I'm not spending any energy on filtering, understanding, because that you're articulate sounds like a compliment. And so
Mhm.
many of these things do, but when you stop to think about it, you start to understand that it's not quite it's a backhanded compliment. So
Mhm.
not even to give any energy to any of that.
One way or another to be forced to decipher it. Um,
Exactly.
and the last thing I'll just say about kind of what it is and who experiences it and how people experience it is that it can come from any and everywhere, right? It can come from the stranger that's around the corner. It can come from a close friend. It can, and to your point, the impact that it has may vary depending on who it comes from and where it comes from. And I think that's what also makes it so insidious too, right? To keep using that word is that you are never quite prepared to receive it because you don't know where it's coming from. And
Hmm.
it goes back to what you were saying, and I think we've talked about this before, about this idea of like either living in the South or living in Jim Crow or whatever that case may be. You almost you know the rules, you know the guidelines, you know where and how you can play. But in this world, that we're in now, and the absence of Jim Crow for the most part, um, and when you think about, microaggressions, you don't know. And so your guard might be down and you're just happily living your life, taking out your trash.
Hmm.
And then you get into this conversation of, wait a minute. And so you're not like you don't have that armor on, right? And so it's so easy because you didn't know you needed it. And I think that's again what makes it so tough. And and the reason why microaggressions have the potential to be so impactful and so damaging. So I want to ask you,
Yes.
from your own experience and your education and your expertise, like what is the impact, right?
Mm.
What's the impact on individuals
Yeah.
um, of experiencing these thousands of cuts on a regular basis?
To say the impacts, that thousand cuts is such a great way of putting it, because that is the impact. And I think some of it definitely depends on, as everything does in psychology with human beings, it depends on a lot of factors in terms of who this person is, and how much their growing up experience, and if they grew up with family that really helped them shore up the sense of self early on, so that they, if you have a strong sense of yourself and who you are and what gifts you bring and what challenges you have, because we all have challenges. But if you're clear about all of that, then it takes a lot more cuts to get in, right? It takes a lot more microaggressions to start making you wonder. Like if you already know that you're articulate because your parents told you from early on that communicate well. So if you already know you're a good communicator, somebody saying that is not is like it. One person is not going to make you question it. It would take 100 people maybe to start getting you to question it. If your parents never told you that you communicate well, your teachers never told you growing up, and we won't even get into how teachers can do microaggressions. But my point is, if early on you didn't have that, so that you own, like, this is something I know I do well, and these are places I know that I don't do so great. If you don't have that strong from early on, then one or two cuts, like one or two times, is all you need to start questioning and wondering, well, what is this? So it really depends on individually, but it can be so damaging, right? And it can be one of the things that contributes to stress, being unhappy, even going as far as suicidal ideation. Because when you have your sense of who you are eroded, and it's not really clear where this is coming from and how to defend against it, and you're trying to, especially when it's in the workplace, when you're trying to make a living, right, and advance in whatever you're doing, then the level of stress that it can cause can make it hard for people. I've had people have difficulty, like, going to work, especially Monday morning, right? Just because they don't want to have to deal with feeling bad, and they don't know where it's coming from, or and it gets normalized. So part of my work with people, when I work with them individually, is sorting through and helping them kind of tease out what's going on, because it starts to get so normalized that they don't even realize that it's microaggressions that are making them feel bad. They think they just feel bad. They don't understand why they're feeling bad. They don't understand why they're stressed. And
Mhm.
so it can be so insidious. And when I think of insidious, I think of that kind of, creeping up on you so much that, like, the pot of water that you put something, a frog or something in, and it's, you raise the temperature and they don't even realize that it's that kind of experience where you don't even realize the effect it's having on you as it's happening. And not even, and if you do realize, on some level, you're not attributing it to what's going on. So then you find yourself overwhelmed in this pot of boiling water, or overwhelmed at this job, and can't even see that there might be a way out, or can't even see what's going on. So it's really difficult.
Um, I love to bring in a pop culture reference, an example, but what makes, and I think your point of, it's like the heat is being turned on. You don't really recognize it. You just kind of start feeling like, okay, I'm a little hot. What's going on? Nobody else is looking like they're hot. Maybe it's just me. Maybe I, need to slow down, inhale, whatever the case may be. And then all of a sudden you're there, right? And I think that's also an impact, right? Where you have not really had the space to understand that it is a raising of the temperature, and then all of a sudden you're hot and you're responding, and then you now have a whole other slew of issues and
Yes.
consequences because you did not act the way that people think you should have acted when somebody just made a comment. And the pop culture reference I bring up is, I don't know if you've heard or seen all of the things about Kelly Rowland at Cannes Film Festival.
Nope.
So Kelly Rowland is walking up the steps, going to, the film viewing, and you see her crowded by ushers or security or whoever they are. and they're kind of, she's trying to have her on the stairs, red carpet moment, but they're kind of, blocking. And when she turns around to try to take a picture and wave, they're like there. So, people aren't getting able to get a clear picture. And at some point, she turns to one of the ushers or security guard and says, or you can't, you just see her mouth, right? And you see her kind of say something, and you see her face, and she's not pleased.
Mhm.
Then, the woman, the security, the usher, she's a woman, and she's like kind of still like, yeah, 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 come on, Kelly. Steps on Kelly's dress. So Kelly kind of turns around again, and she's like, you know, like whatever she says.
Mhm.
Then they continue to walk up the steps. The usher, or again, security person, must be saying something. So Kelly turns around and Kelly gets that finger up and is like, dot, 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 dot.
Mhm.
So you don't know what she's saying. There's no audio. It's far enough, but it's just become this whole big conversation. So a lot of, and listen, I love it. A lot of the people from the deaf community, people who are able to read lips are like, oh, this is what she said. And so now there's this whole conversation based on this input from the deaf community. And they're saying that she says, don't talk to me like that. Um, and the first time she turned around, she was like, don't talk to me like that. The woman, I guess, must have continued, and she turns around again. She's like, do not talk to me like that. I am not a child and you are not my mother. So again, something else must have been said, and you can't really see the usher's face, so you don't know, we don't have the insight of, the lip readers to know what she says. So, and then again, Kelly turns around that last time and it's just like, do not, talk to me like this. I'm not your child. I'm not whatever, whatever. And so, there's been a whole dialogue of why was she treated this way? Was it, and you only see a, 15-second clip, or if that, whatever, how length it is. And some people were like, oh, she had her moment and she was taking too long, or, oh, she was trying, like, everybody knows you got to keep it moving on the red carpet and all this stuff. And then there you have other celebrities that seem to have had their moment without any type of issue and without any type of, shuffling and hurrying up the steps. But I raised that point to, like, as an outsider looking in, it definitely looks like she was not treated with respect, with the care that maybe some other celebrities were treated with. But again, you're seeing this 15 minutes clip, so who knows? But I think at the very least, what you can say is that there was something that the person, the usher, had said and continued to say that caused Kelly to speak up for herself or to set that boundary.
Mhm.
Or the reason why I use it as an example in this conversation is because it was happening, it was happening, it was happening, and there was no acknowledgement of and response to Kelly saying, please don't talk to me like that, don't talk to me like that, okay, I'm moving. But yet you kept repeating that behavior.
Right.
And then when Kelly kind of got to the point where her finger came out, now it's you're an angry
Wow.
Black woman.
Mhm.
Now it's, oh my gosh, how inappropriate and unprofessional and rude. Oh my gosh, she's a diva. Oh my gosh, all of these different things. And there becomes this whole other narrative around it. And I think that's like, again, that seems to me like a common example of what happens when sometimes people respond to these microaggressions, or not even just microaggressions, but like days, weeks, numbers, whatever it is of microaggressions that you've normalized, or people around you have normalized, you haven't addressed, or you try to address, but it keeps happening. And then you get to this point where you're so bubbled up over
Mhm.
that you respond in a way that feels very like warranted in your eyes, because you're like, I've been dealing with this.
Exactly.
But to the outside world, who's just like, I just said she was articulate. I don't understand why she yelled at me. I don't know why she said that, like responded that way. And then it becomes your problem, which I think adds to the whole frustration around it, because you're like, there are these, it's like that little sister or little brother that's like, I'm not touching you, I'm not touching you. And you're like, please leave me alone. And then you finally get to your limit and you're like screaming at them. And then everybody's like, well, why did you react that way? Why wasn't there conversations about all of these times that led up to that moment?
Mhm.
That was all kind of forgiven and brushed by the wayside. But my mind, my heart remembers those and kind of, holds on to them, whether or not I question my ability.
Yes.
I hold on to those experiences, and catch me on a good day or a wrong day, I may not be able to set the boundary in a diplomatic way that you expect me to do because I'm so overwhelmed by the amount of times that I've experienced it.
Or from what you just described, I set the boundary in a diplomatic way more than once, and it wasn't enough.
Mhm,
And so I feel now I have, whether it's conscious or not, no other recourse but to, blow things up. So in whatever way that looks like, which is so frustrating because it does feel like you're in this system where you can't win.
mhm,
No matter what you do, or it's really difficult to have those conversations, right? You try to have the conversation. I'm sorry, but I know that you probably meant that as a compliment, but when you say to me that you're articulate, you know, that's what we call a microaggression, and it's actually not a compliment. But what do you mean? I just trying to compliment you. But that what do you mean is not really an invitation to, well, help me understand, right? It's so
mhm,
rare that we get the real invitation. Help me understand. I didn't intend it that way. Please help me understand so that I don't do that again. We rarely get that. What we usually get is the defensiveness. Oh, but that's not what I meant. You know what I meant. You know I'm a good person and that I was just trying to compliment you. Well, that's all well and good. But if you're really a good person, what I need from you is to try to understand my perspective. I
mhm,
I definitely understand that you didn't mean to insult me. I believe that, but I also need you to believe and understand and try to understand that you did insult me. And I can explain to you why. About some this one I can explain because I've thought about it, but part of the problem is most of the time when this happens, you feel it, right? It's a heart thing, and it takes a while before it can become a brain thing where you could articulate it because a lot of the times it's like that just didn't feel right, right? That this
mhm,
I feel bad now. I'm questioning myself now, but I don't quite understand why. So
mhm,
sometimes it's like that.
mhm.
Um, but yes, it becomes this vicious cycle where then as you said, everything that happened before, that's taken away, and now we're just focused with the
Reaction.
angry Black woman
Mhm,
in the situation you described, but some version of that,
mhm,
right? That doesn't address any of the reasons why. Okay, yeah, I am angry, and I am a
mhm,
Black woman. Yes, that's all true. Why am I angry? I didn't just wake up today and decide to come in and yell at everybody. That's just not how it happened. Something happened. Could we look at? Yes, I can take responsibility for the fact that right now, whatever I just said or did may not have been the best way to deal with it. But can we also look at how I tried to deal with it 3 times before
right,
and nobody
right,
listened to me, and that
mhm,
it left me with this recourse?
right,
Or sometimes the reality is I tried to deal with it over here and it didn't get dealt with over here, and so now I'm angry over here. And so the reality is, in some of those situations it may not have been anything here, but I experienced so many microaggressions here or at my last job, right? That I come in ready for a fight because
yes,
I'm not going to be the victim again. I don't want to deal with this again. So it's all that complexity, but so rarely is anybody on the other end, anybody on the aggressor side, willing to have a true conversation about all of that. You either get the defensive or you're the problem. Let's get rid of the problem.
mhm,
It's so rare that we get to have the conversations. Like, I really want you to understanding, and understanding makes such a big difference in everything. But it's so hard to get people to sit with this because they're good. They want to be good people, and you can be a good person and make a mistake, and you can be a good person and because of your beliefs say something that is not taken well.
Mhm.
But you'd be a better person if then you try to understand why that wasn't taken well, so you don't do it again. Because that's really what we're saying is, I don't want you to do this to me again. I don't want you to do this to anybody else. If you understand why, you might not do it again. If you just get defensive, it's gonna happen
Absolutely. Absolutely. So just to recap, when we're talking about the impacts of microaggression, it can be physical, right? The amount of the stress, the anxiety, and it can show up in how, in raised blood pressure and all of these different things, right? Maybe unsupportive or unhealthy habits around, trying to almost self-soothe, I think, in a way of like,
again. Definitely.
I'm feeling frustrated, I'm feeling stressed.
Overeating,
Maybe
yeah.
you overeat, maybe you drink, maybe try to find and exert control in other areas of your life physically that may be the
Mm,
case.
yes.
It's the emotional and the mental part of it where you start to doubt and challenge yourself, or to doubt yourself and your challenge to think that you can show up in the way that you need to show up or the way that you've shown up in the past.
Right.
The anxiety, right? It's all of those pieces that and ultimately those can impact your performance, going back to the idea of the workplace, right? If
Exactly.
I'm coming in and whether or not I believe or I'm leaning into the doubt that exists, maybe I'm not, but I'm so frustrated, I'm so concerned about the what I'm going to face, right? I have so much armor on
Yes.
that I can't be my true self. I can't bring my full self to work.
Mhm.
Um, I'm weighed down by this that I don't want to establish relationships with the people that I work with or the relationships with the people in my community because I'm tired. And that's often how I have felt where I'm like, I am so tired of either having to defend, having to educate, or having to dismiss and not to overlook it because that would if I bring attention to it or I try to have a conversation about it, I then become the problem
Mhm.
or it becomes this heavy lift, heavy emotional and mental labor that I just don't feel like doing, right? I just want to go take out my trash or I just want to go and like have a nice conversation, have a nice drink. I don't want to have to always be on
Yeah.
and be ready. So then that can impact your relationships. It can impact your social life, which we all know then impacts like how all these other things. So it's all interconnected. But I think it's just really important to acknowledge that, you know, even though micro isn't, and we think of micro, we think of minute, we think of really small, and we think of when we think of small and micro situations, we don't think of it as having sizable impact or sizable consequences, right? But you think about that like grain of sand in your shoe, or like you know what I mean? Like it can irritate, it can erode, and it can bother you to a point where it is going to spill out into other areas of your life and show up in different ways. So I think it's important to understand as those that are, frequent recipients of microaggressions and those that, um, you know, maybe aren't frequent recipients, but have heard the term and they're a little bit dismissive of it. Cause I've seen that a lot where it's like, microaggressions is the new hot topic or the hot word or the hot trend. Like it's really not that big of a deal. People always say stuff to me. I get over it. But like there is, again, when you're having those thousands of cuts, the
Yes.
wounds end up being very, very deep and hard to heal.
Yes.
But shifting us into the okay, how do you respond? And you've shared a couple of ways that you've recommended or like maybe you've even taken on yourself. But what are your thoughts on how you respond to either in the moment for that relationship, that conversation, or even how do you take care of yourself outside of that situation?
I think taking care of yourself is really important on multiple levels. I think it's important to have colleagues, friends, community that you can sort through things with, or therapists that you can sort through things with, because it can be, you know, the nature of, as we said in definition of microaggressions, this insidious nature, the lack of clarity. You really need a space and a place where you can kind of say, okay, I know this didn't feel good. Can you help me figure out why that might be? So you can sort through things. And I think every every person in a marginalized community that's experienced microaggressions needs to have their safe spaces where they can sort through that. So I'd say that that's, I guess, defense number one is a place to process it, right? To sort through it, to um, unearth it, because sometimes you feel it in your heart, or you might have a glimmer in your brain, but you just don't really know what it is until you really look at it. Um, I think knowing yourself and knowing kind of what you need is really important. What you need for self-care, because the stronger you are just as a being, right? The more you take good care of yourself, making sure you're drinking water, exercising, like doing all the things that just every single human being, marginalized group or not, every single human being needs to do these things, sleep well. The more you do all of those things and manage stress overall and take good care of yourself, the better you can deal with anything that comes your way, right? It's like if you have a good, healthy immune system, then you're less likely to catch a cold. Or if you get a cold, it's not going to be bad. But if you have a compromised immune system, then any germ that comes in is going to, wreak havoc. So the better you are at good self-care, the less likely the stuff is to really get in and take over. Uh, it's harder to answer. How do you answer, deal with the microaggressions in the moment? Because a lot of that really depends on how safe you feel, the relationship you have with that person. Um, so many factors, go into how do you respond. I think going back to your safe community, that sometimes you can respond in the moment, and if you can come up with kind of your usual response to these kinds of things, that might be helpful for some people. I find a lot of times you need to go to your community and you need to sort through it first, and then you may not be able to respond in the moment. You might have to go back, because in those moments, especially unless it's something really clear that you've dealt with before, like the articulate thing, like I can come up with something for that because I'm almost expecting it. Um,
Mhm.
I've dealt with it before,
Just
but
sad
there's
on a whole other level, but yes.
yes, yes, totally set on another level. But the one that I finally came up with one when I was in graduate school, I was the only Black woman in my class of PhD students. But we worked at the second year, we all worked at the university clinic, and a number of our clients were people of color. And so we had these weekly case presentation things where we would present a case and get feedback from each other. And so there was a case, it wasn't my case, that was presented of a client that was of Haitian background. And they all looked to me for information about, like, so can you tell us about Haiti and what we can expect? And I was like, I've never been to Haiti. I don't think I even know anybody that's Haitian. Like, no, I can't. Like, I but I remember I was so young when I went to graduate school. I started graduate school at 21. I was such a baby, and had so little world experience with these kinds of things. So that was one of those times I remember thinking, there's something not right about this, that they
Mhm.
expect that I know about people from Haiti without any, like, why would you expect that I would know this
Mhm.
without asking? It's not like I've said, oh yeah, my family's from, like, this has never come up before, but it was obvious that they were expecting that I should have some, not just some knowledge, but some deep knowledge about this culture
Mhm.
that I didn't know anything about. And I remember thinking, this doesn't feel right. I don't know what to do with it. I don't even know what to do here, because they should I and I remember thinking, well, should I know? And you know what I did? I think it was the next year we had this elective class, our only class in working with people of culture was an elective class. And in the elective class, I did a paper on Haiti. I think that got in there, like, somehow it's like, should I
Why
know?
don't I know about it? Maybe I should know about it.
Right. Maybe I should
Right.
know about it. But no, nobody else in the room was expected to know about Haitian
Yeah.
culture. And I don't think anybody looked and said, "Oh, your surname is French." So,
Mhm.
like, no, like, that was an expectation. So I think that knowing what to say in the moment can be really, like, tricky,
Yeah.
and knowing that you can get such backlash, which can make, like, so the microaggression was a little cut, and now the backlash is a big old gash, that
Mhm.
a lot of times I think that it's hard to figure out, and it may feel safer and just like to not address it in the moment. I think the bigger thing is to figure out how you can address it. Like,
I love all that what you said, and I will give my 2 cents as someone who's worked, whole life in corporate America and have experienced, like I said, many microaggressions in those settings. And I think I do think that there's not a one size fits all to it. I do think, the idea of how safe do you feel definitely matters. I think it's also how confident and how set in who you are um, dictates how you might respond. You say when in your younger years, I think in my younger years, when I was newer into certain spaces, I may not have said anything, right? I may have noticed, and it depends on the situation, especially in, I think, the corporate environment, where if it was from my boss, I might not say anything. If it was from a peer, maybe I would have said something. Um, but I think as I got older and became a little bit more set in my ideas of what's right and what's wrong, how I want to be treated, what I'm willing to tolerate, how I want to show up and how I show up in the world,
mhm,
right? If I don't treat people this way and I don't wield these microaggressions or these careless kind of statements, and if I'm so thoughtful of how I speak to other people and mea culpa when I might hurt someone's feelings or speak out of turn, then I have every right to expect that of everybody else. And so being a little bit more staunch in that positioning, I think I have been able to speak up a little bit more. And what I will say is I often just I call them in instead of saying out, maybe it's a little bit of calling them out, but I try to bring attention to what they just said, right?
mhm,
And sometimes it's again, depending on who it is or where it is or how egregious this aggression was, um might dictate how forceful or how direct I am. But often it's just like, well, what do you mean by that? Or explain to me, I'm not sure how that's, or like the example of the, oh, she's such a good writer. I said, well, why would you expect anything different? Well, oh, just well, I just didn't know. And I said, but you do know that they have multiple degrees from Ivy Leagues.
mhm,
So wouldn't you expect them to be able to write? Well, yeah, but I said, did you ask X person, or were you surprised when they wrote this? Did you give them that same compliment? And so sometimes it's not I'm in their face pointing the finger, or I'm, puffing up my chest, but it is just kind of calmly guiding them and almost repeating what they just said. And I think, to the kind of how we started this is, it might not be intentional, it might not even be a conscious thing, but I think when you start to ask questions about, and help them to explain what their comment meant, or why did they say that, they actually will start to recognize the unacceptable nature, or that there were some other underlining things that they may not have thought about that bubbled up in that comment.
mhm,
Now, does that necessarily resolve it? Does that necessarily get you an apology? Maybe not. But again, I'm in a place in my life where I don't need the apology, right? What I need you to do is behave a certain way and treat me with a certain level of respect.
mhm,
What you say about me when I'm out when I'm out of sight, what you think about me when I'm out of sight is
mhm,
not my concern and is not my problem. But I do know that our interactions is needs to be a certain way. And so I think it's just like what you were saying, of just kind of figuring out, how do you take care of yourself, get yourself fortified in a place where you feel empowered and confident to address it as much as you feel like you need to in that moment, and realize that it's not necessarily your responsibility, at least I feel, to educate others. It's more about how to live their lives or how to operate. It's more about holding them accountable about how they're going to interact with you. And I think sometimes when you take that approach, it feels a little less daunting because now it's not a I'm attacking you, I'm attacking your people, I'm attacking this whole, system. I'm just saying this is how I expect to be interacted, and then it puts the onus on that person to
Yeah.
either do the research, to try to understand. And if they come back and say, I don't like, why was that offensive, or what, I may have a conversation about it. I may be willing to engage, or I may say, there's plenty of things on Google and plenty of books to read that can explain it to you much better than I can. Have a good day.
Yeah.
So that's kind of that's my approach. And again, I think it's a grown into it kind of approach for how to handle it. But I think asking questions and really helping to hold up the mirror
Yeah, I love that.
has been very helpful.
I love that. I love the asking questions because then it does lighten the load on whoever, because the situation you're describing, you weren't the direct recipient of the microaggression, but it still lightened your load that you did not have to have the heavy burden of this education, but just kind of and although people can get defensive no matter what, but it was a gentler way of kind of just think about what you said. Is that really what you meant? I love that, and I love what I also gathered from what you said is the permission. Give yourself permission to find your way of navigating this, and understand that how you navigate it when you're early in your career, how you navigate it after you have experience may change, and that's okay. But give yourself permission to address it directly, and ask for the respect you deserve in the moment, but also permission to maybe not address it right now because for whatever reasons you're not ready to, you're not clear, whatever. uh, Give yourself that permission so that you can take good care of you, and that you're not adding to the weight, right? You're not taking one small cut and now you could be making it bigger as well.
Right.
So by adding the weight of feeling like you have to
Hmm.
address this all the time, and and some of us do that, right? That we feel like we have to be the ones to save all of the other people of color to come by addressing this issue. But the reality is, some days you can, some days you can't, some days it's just too heavy, and some days you are ready and you have the words and you have the clarity, and so to give yourself grace and not to make it heavier by forcing yourself to be in a space if you're not in that space, I think is also really important.
Yes, absolutely. And you said something earlier about, whether or not something was like the best way or the right way. And one of the things that I think about in that regards is like, I don't know that there is a best or a right, because again, things can you can feel like it was, and everybody can cheer you on and say that was the right and the best way, and then still there could be fallout, right? There still could be repercussions. So I think where I also try to come from is, this is the way that I did deal with it, or this is whatever happened, and then owning the outcome of that. I think that for me, that's very helpful. So I to your point, I don't get too wrapped up in the should I, coulda, woulda, I should, is this the best way? Is this the right way? What went wrong? And because then that becomes an additional load and heaviness. So I try to think of what am I going to, how do I respond to it in a way that feels authentic, feels good, that honors who I am, and carries the values that I have, which are integrity, respect, all of this kindness and love. That doesn't mean that I might not, come out
That's
swinging sometimes,
still loving
but
sometimes.
right.
Mhm.
But if I'm true to who I am and how I'm feeling, I think that is the right way or the best way in that moment. And that doesn't mean that I can't learn from it and do differently the next time, but I can give myself a little bit of grace of this is how I dealt with it. These are the decisions that I made, and honestly, these are the outcomes or the consequences of the decisions that I made in that moment. And
Mhm.
now I have to figure out what I'm going to do with these, right?
Exactly.
Um,
I'd like,
and that also helps me to not feel so much pressure, I think.
yeah, yeah. So I'd like to wrap up this conversation, although, you and I can first of all talk forever,
Always.
and then we could talk forever about this topic. But I guess I'd like to double down on one of the things you just said was a lot of it is about knowing who you are. If you know your values, you just mentioned your values. Knowing your values helps guide you through all of this, right? It helps guide you in how you might approach it. It helps guide you in taking better care of yourself. It helps guide you in everything. And maybe some of this is my bias as a clinical psychologist, but I think when we know ourselves, it helps us, guides us through life when we really have deep self knowledge. And definitely knowing yourself well can help you deal with microaggressions, deal with the experiencing them, and understanding how you want to respond to them and how you want to not let them take over your existence.
Absolutely. Could not say have said it better.
Thank you for the wonderful conversation.